All right, next item is the Board Policy 480, Accounting and Audits.
Do you want me to talk about this?
Mr. Walsh, you had requested this.
You
so-
requested this, so.
I also did you circulate the document, Kevin, that I gave you?
You sent it to the whole board.
Oh, okay. So in the course of the audit, when we were here last week, or last meeting, having the audit presented to us, in the board policy, one board policy says that we have to approve the audit, we found out that the actual audit in a state mandated form had already been sent to the state. So my concern was that I read the policy, its audits are mentioned in 4 places in there, that the board it has to be presented to the board has to approve it, it has to be presented to state. It doesn't differentiate between a form sent to the state and the form that we get. And I'm concerned that, we should have approved as the board policy requires before we sent the form to the state. Now, I also want to say that we've been, all of us were at different presentations with the IASB, the Illinois Association of School Boards, over the last week. We also had a presentation at the fall dinner where it's clear that there's a lot of rules of the state that even experienced administrators and speakers just aren't aware of. If you can remember, when we were at the dinner, we got a presentation from a retired superintendent who speaks all the time and gave us his lengthy resume, and one of his issues was rogue board members. And one example was a rogue board member was they asked for a monthly copy of the activity fund report. Well, voila, the Illinois State Board rules and the Illinois Administrative Code, which is a law, requires that the board be given a report every month. That came up again when some of us were in a presentation on internal controls. The same thing, another experienced board member, CPA, saying, I asked my board, it's good practice to ask your board to get it. Well, it's better practice to actually follow the rule, but clearly people don't know. So I'm saying this in a expectation as I'm not feeling like we're purposely being misled, and in fact, the auditor recommended that we do it, and supposedly he's an expert on the audits too, but I think our policy is pretty clear. I think it refers to an audit, and I think it's important that in this, in any other, if there's any doubt, we should make sure that if the board has to approve something, it gets approved before we submit it. So that was one issue. The second issue is on the audit, as you read through it, and again, there's 2 issues I'm going to bring up on this other audit item, the internal controls. I have no feeling, inclination, belief that there's any misdeeds going on, any fraud or anything anybody hears. But I think it's very important that as a board, we've all, most of us have been on for a couple of years at least. Ed's a little newer, but he's had all the training. What do we always hear? We hired a superintendent, and we're responsible for the policy and making sure they're followed. So I think it's important we look at that. And another part of the audit policy says that we're supposed to have the superintendent's credit card account audited, and it's supposed to be, make sure it gets properly approved. Maybe I'm missing something, and it's in a report we buried, or in one of the long reports, but I don't think that's presented to us. And like the activity fund we talked about earlier in the year, and now we're getting it every month, I want to make sure that if that information provided to us, because it's what the policy requires. Otherwise, we should change the policy. So that is on the audit side. On the internal control side, it's twofold. There's 2 parts of the internal control that are addressed in the various policies. One is we're supposed to make, and I think Mike was one who was explaining this and focusing on this, that there was some, as a board, knowing that our auditor audited the township treasurer should give us some comfort, because they also know if they have what they have in place, what they have controls or whatever. But our policy says we're supposed to know what their internal controls is, and we're supposed to get reports on investments from on a quarterly basis. Again, analogize it, whether people agree or not. You know, I'm sure people, the Lions Township or the Lions LT High School had no idea that there was people stealing money from their township treasurer, and I don't have comfort that we have great knowledge of that either. And as Gary, I think, was the one who looked originally, I tried to do some searching. There's no information on any website that I could find. Could you, Gary, on our township treasurer?
Not on our township treasurer.
We couldn't find any, at least the LT Township Treasurer has a website, there's not much there, but, so we don't have access to the information, but we have a duty to make sure that we know the internal controls are good, so somehow I think we need to dig into that a little more. And lastly, on internal controls, is one of our policies says the superintendent is supposed to audit our internal controls on an annual basis, which seems like a silly thing to have in a policy in one sense, because unless they're a CPA and have plenty of time on their hands, I don't know how they could do it. Then you have to do it, the next choice is you have your CPA do it. Well, he's the one, that'd be like, you know, me policing myself. Not again, would never disparage Tim. I think he does a nice job. I would never think he was stealing, but nobody thinks you have problems with your controls until you find out you have problems with your controls. So I think we have not had a close look at our internal controls. I'm a little concerned that they're not documented. And again, we went to the presentation, and clearly the small school districts have an issue, because if you're a big district, like a big company, it's easy to separate the different functions. In your small district like ours, where you're watching your cost, we even have a part-time person, you just can't separate all the functions, which to me mitigates or pushes harder that we should take a look at them occasionally from some outside professional. And so on that one, I'm suggesting that we actually find out what the cost is to have an outside agency, CPA firm, audit our internal controls, so we have some comfort that they are good. And tied to that, Kevin, with our approval, hired an additional service from the IASB. You all know we get the press on the policies. They also have a service on all the procedures, because we have so many policies that say the superintendent's supposed to set up a procedure. Kevin's done a lot, tried to do that as much as he could since he's been here, but there's, again, we need 3 superintendents to have somebody do that all the time. So we are doing that, and I think as part of it, we either need to have Kevin assure us that there's some internal control type policies or procedures he's getting, or we need to consider whether we should have some documented internal control procedures and maybe tie that to the CPA coming and look at our internal controls.
Okay, so a couple, one, we're already ahead of you, and Tim has asked for a proposal on what it would cost to audit the district's internal controls based on previous discussions. So we're looking into that. I need some help from the board with policy 480. The annual financial report, we just got to get our policies a little more aligned, so I know in December we're meeting with our policy council, we can look at this. If you look at 480, it just says that the annual audit should be given to the board, which it was about almost a month before the auditor came. I did not have the board, I did not go through the financial report prior to submitting that AFR with the board. So Mr. Walsh is accurate with that, so that needs to be corrected on our part going forward. The report was done by the October 15th deadline. If you remember, though, that was the same time we were bringing Carrie in for life safety and so we pushed the auditor back to November, and we did not request an extension. So the report was done, but we had talked a little bit at finance, trying to do the life safety report, the last data presentation, and doing the auditor would have been too much for one meeting. So that's why I pushed it back. But the AFR was submitted. Where the conflict is there's, you know, when we look at some of this stuff, or when Tim and I are doing some of this stuff, we look up like 480, accounting and audits. So it doesn't formally say the board needs to approve, just says it should be submitted to the board and discussed with the board. But then if you go to 220 and you go over duties of the board, then it says, you know, it gives a list of the 6 or 8 documents that the board should approve every year, and one of those 8 is the audit. So we either have to, you know, we just want to make sure we align those 2 policies.
Can you put that on the calendar to help you with that?
Yeah, it's on our operational calendar. So I'll just make sure it's, you know, that I changed the verbiage so it says submit to the board, the AFR. It's on our operational calendar. So in regards to the internal controls on the superintendent's credit card and the district's credit card, which the policy talks about in 455, we're already, the board is already monitoring that or auditing that. That's on a monthly bills list under the American Express. The district has one account. That's both any credit card purchase from either Tim and I are the only 2 card holders,
Okay.
and the board, and those are all itemized out.
And we do get, yeah, I didn't know that.
Right, so
what
like
that
when
was
you see
for.
on there, most of the stuff you could see is like micro tower, wireless mouse, stuff like that. Then there's one lunch for $28. That's
Yeah,
superintendent.
so that American Express entry is all the
It's
district
everything.
credit cards.
And
Okay, I
the way,
wasn't
the
aware
way
of
the
that.
board oversees that, we can just ask ahead of time before the meeting to see to that less than $100 or less than $200 monthly fee. You can call in and show up a little bit earlier, and he'll have all the paid bills, and you can take a look at it. Because the policy says, you know, through the audit and the approval process.
Right.
Well, the approval process is us approving it, and then if you want to look at the actual documentation to see what's there, that's the approval process. The audit process, my understanding is, the auditor went through the credit cards and the credit card receipts as part of the audit.
I did check on that today. They had to pull files on all the credit card stuff, and there was no problems with that. So the auditor did check that.
Well, again, if everybody else knew that that American Express entry was included, the only 2 cards, and one was Kevin's, I wasn't aware of that. I thought Kevin, I think
Yeah.
Tim has said before, this is we drop things in here when they don't fit other places.
It's only 2 cards, Tim and
Okay.
mine, and they're out of the impressed,
Okay,
because the way the statement is due, it's like immediately following our board meeting, so we approve it, and then she, but then each item is broken out so that you can see, and then there's an account, so you could see that it was taken on my account to pay for the lunch meeting.
And
And
this,
then, this is an example of, but then we take the receipts and obviously we staple them to the bill. So I went through just to see how our internal controls were on it today. I think we're in really good shape. Every single bill is itemized and every receipt is stapled to the item, the receipt and the invoices are stapled. So I think we're in good shape.
we
with
clarified that one, it was like.
the credit card, yeah.
When Gary brought up on the activity funds, well, forgetting the report, we're meeting the policy, I agree.
Right.
We're meeting the policy there, I wasn't aware that, I thought that was Tim's
and your
credit card.
segregation of duties, he doesn't even get to see his own American Express bill of what he charges. That doesn't even go to him.
I did have to go hunt for that today, so that's
He's
a good
got to
sign.
submit, he's got to
That's good, we
submit,
heard that at the conference.
he's got to
So-
submit his receipts one way, someone else is receiving the statements the other way. And,
Okay, so given that for the policy committee.
So I just gotta work on the policy, we'll get a proposal back on what it would cost for an audit on the internal controls, if the board wants to approve that. I don't know how much we can do on the internal controls of the township treasurer, based on what you were asking about in your, as the board's seen, I submitted a letter requesting from the district and the Board of Education that the township treasurer, at minimum, put up a website that shows its annual audit and its quarterly financials. I did not receive any response.
I mean,
Could you put a formal response in there that annually we should automatically receive their audit report, hard copy that we can have here, or at least get emailed to us electronically?
Okay.
I mean, it's ironic to me that they have less requirements than we require of our parent volunteer clubs,
It's true.
which is,
but they're
it's
created by,
ridiculous.
they're created by statute. We're stuck with them. We're required to use them. We're required to be part of that.
So let's just formalize the communication with a formal
For the
written communication with them that's saying that we want to get an electronic copy of their audit upon their approval of it.
Let's
If
ask
they're
for
not,
other
if they're
things.
not gonna go and put themselves up to public scrutiny with a website.
And other other counties don't have this township animal
True.
that they have to deal with. And Ed, you had a question last time about, is it recommended or not to have the same auditor do the township and the school?
Right.
And I asked that question of the speaker, who was not from Cook County, and he said it would be preferred that the same auditor do the township and all the underlying schools that make up that township. But, you know, we can only worry about ourselves, so we have it and we have it here. He said that is a preferred way to do
Okay,
it.
good.
You know, one of the things he said is, when they're doing the township, they're watching your money come in and making sure you're getting credit for it. And then when he's doing your school audit, he's still got to do that same thing to determine you're getting credit properly for the money. So he's already doing that work up here. It'd be good to see both sides of the transactions, was the way I believe I heard him say that. And we had some follow-up questions, and so we did push that forward for you.
Good, thank you.
All right, anything else?
Yeah, I want to ask you know, if our policy says we're supposed to get established that they have a good system of internal controls and we get a quarterly report on investment, we're violating our policy unless we try to get it. So besides what Gary said, I would like to include that in the letter, to say we want the quarterly investment report, we want records on their internal controls and our operating procedures to prevent loss and fraud and employee error.
Well, let's direct them to do that, and then he can come back and discuss it with one of his advisory policies, whichever applies, and then bring it back to the board.
So I want to just align to Mike,
Well,
because
I will say we're violating the policy if we don't try to do it, whether you want
Right.
to talk to 7 different meetings. And that's part of my issue here, is we have policies, the policies are supposed to be followed. You know, when they come up and we read them, then it's highlighted, and we either have to change this policy,
And that might be the outcome of the
or we have to
discussion.
do what the policy says.
If there's no way for us to control them, I don't think our policy should have things that mandate we're reviewing stuff that they
Well, I
have
didn't look, but I'd be
no
willing to
control
bet.
over getting.
I can't believe they don't have this stuff.
We need
And
to
if they,
ask,
and if they don't, it's a big problem.
right.
Okay, anything else?
Well, I think the conversation was, do we ask the superintendent to ask for those things? And-
He said he was gonna
Yes,
do that.
okay.
Yeah.
I got
All right,
that.
so nobody's confused. Then
formalized
we've asked-
formalized communication, so we get an
Okay.
annual audit from the township and align the reporting with our township policy, or with our policies.
Dr. King?
You have a
Yeah,
question?
Mike, you mentioned by statute we have to use them. Isn't Lyons Township High School trying to fire their treasurer?
They're trying to get out of that arrangement, and if they do, we'll see what they did and evaluate it. But right
But
now.
John, right now, they have not even brought it out of committee. Down, the state legislature has to do it, and it hasn't even come out of committee yet, so. So if it even doesn't come out of committee, John, if it doesn't come out of committee, it doesn't even go to House floor or Senate floor.
It's a process that the legislature would have to approve for them to get out. You can't just resign from your township treasurer.
And if that actually happens, we can,
Then we follow,
we
yeah.
can consider doing that, but I don't think we need to.
Well, I just wonder if,
So can we have the policy committee look at 4.3? Because there are certain things that's asked, that we're supposed to be going to the township treasurer and annually approving their bank accounts and things like that. So can we have the policy committee look at this? And if we need to work more closely with the township treasurer or whoever this body is, we need them to formalize so that we don't let this slip beyond.
We'll ask the administration to look at that.
Yeah,
and-
let the administration
and-
get together with the policy,
And bring it to
whatever.
his advisory council to see what might
Was
might
it
come out of that.
4.03 or 4.30?
4.4:30, revenue and investments.
Okay.
you know, while the states, the committee, whatever, Matt, you're familiar with this, is looking at this issue, I mean, now maybe is the time to make some changes to the law, maybe to make them do certain things, to make it less prone to happen again. I hope someone, you know, if this is run by the state, is looking at this, and it's not a widespread problem, you know, so.
I want to say Representative Durkin out of Western Springs is working with LT down in the legislature. But from what I understand, it hasn't gained much momentum.
But on the other hand, using the township treasurer on over 80 to 90% of your expenditures and your incomes is a good segregation of duties, and it's a good internal control.
If they have good internal
Right.
controls.
Yeah.
If they're like the Lyons Township treasurer, it's a pretty bad one if they're stealing the money, right? It's a
And
bad
again,
internal
then they're
control.
gonna sue the auditor, which they are. You know, like the guy said in the seminar, you're never gonna prevent every fraud. You know, for 22 of my 30 years where I work, I've been in the fraud business, detecting fraud, looking for fraud, evaluating internal controls. You know, I don't think we're in a bad position here through the business office, what I've seen since I've been visiting the office in 2004 to date. I think we're in a good position. I just think that the policies, you know, just need to be brought back to the superintendent, make sure we're doing what it says, and if it's not something we should be doing, then we need to adjust it, and that's what hopefully he'll bring forward, which will take a little bit of
I
time.
Just
I
remember
just
what
wanna
the-
know from the board, like, I didn't get much response, I didn't even get that they were, you know, like,
That they were what?
that they even acknowledged that they received my last letter.
I mean.
So I'm gonna call, I'm gonna
Well,
take
then
this,
why
I'm
don't
gonna
you,
call
why don't you
George.
call him and bring him in front of us again, and we'll make sure that he hears us, and we'll
Okay.
make sure the public hears that we've asked him questions and he hasn't responded back to us,
We
Okay.
pay him $70,000 a year.
right?
Yeah.
Right,
I mean, I think we need to follow this up. We wanted every check from our parent volunteer clubs posted on a website, and yet we send all this money, and you're not worried? You're not worried that they have internal controls? You're not worried in how they
Yeah, but,
invest that money?
no, Laura,
He's not
Laura,
saying
we've
that.
asked him to create a public website,
Correct?
and we asked him to send the audit.
Right.
So now we're gonna formalize this, and if he still ignores us, let's get him in front of the public here, and we can ask him questions why he's not answering our questions.
Yeah, and all the expenditures we make through them are originated in this building. And they're originated in this building with paperwork and approval and through the computer system. And then they deliver the checks, and when the board approves them after the board meeting, the checks are sitting in the vault, and the checks go out after that meeting.
Mike, I don't want to challenge you to get in an argument, but I also sent you an article from Proviso West where our township treasurer had over $1 million error, and it took them over a year to straighten it out and correct Proviso's balance, and they didn't have access to the cash. So again, I'm taking it from a account in a newspaper, but that's what it states. So I lack confidence that we can rely on what this guy came in and told us when there's nothing to support it. And I agree with the way Gary suggested moving forward with it.
Okay.
I think, okay, sorry, Matt. Tim, I think you got a great point about, okay, we have the policy, we follow the policy. I mean, the public has to know that. I mean, this is across the board on all kinds of different things. We can't ignore certain things. And if we need to fix it, let's fix it. Thanks.
Okay, anything else?